Imagine this. It's the middle of the night. You're lying in bed. No one is watching. No one is judging. But something stirs inside you, primal, unfiltered. A thought, a craving. A shadow crawling out of the back of your mind. It's not polite. It's not safe. It's not what you'd ever speak aloud. But it's there. And it wants to be fed. You think your sexual desire is just a fleeting feeling. A biological itch to scratch? No, it's far more than that. It's a mirror. A confession. A coded message from the depths of who you truly are. It's not just about pleasure. It's about power, pain, shame, longing, trauma, and identity. It tells you what you fear, what you worship, what you lost, what you never got. And above all, what you are still running from. Some of you crave control, not in boardrooms, in bedrooms. You want to dominate, to bend another to your will. You tell yourself it's just a kink, but really, it's a hunger for certainty in a world that made you feel powerless. Maybe as a child, maybe through betrayal, maybe through being invisible for too long. You don't just want to be strong. You want to feel stronger than the chaos you've survived. Others desire submission. To be used, owned, broken. You say it's about trust, but deep down maybe it's about escape, surrender. The beautiful silence of giving up the burden of your decisions for just a moment. Because life, this endless noise of expectation and judgment, is louder than you can bear, and you long to go silent. Some chase novelty, taboo, the thrill of the forbidden. The darker, the better. But why? Is it boredom? Or is it rebellion? Are you trying to prove that you're not like the rest? That you can dance with the shadows and not burn? Maybe you want to touch the fire because deep down, you never learned how to feel anything real unless it hurt. Others yearn for purity, romance, safety. You want soft, slow, meaningful intimacy. But that too says something. Maybe you grew up in violence. Maybe you were used. Maybe sex for you is the only place left where you can demand tenderness. You're not weak, you're healing. You're building a sanctuary in the only way you know how. You see, sexual desire isn't just an appetite. It's a coded archive of your psychological DNA. It's everything you've ever feared, wanted, lost, envied, or buried. Most people never look that deeply. They judge it, repress it, act on it blindly, or shame themselves for even feeling it. But the truth is this. If you had the courage to stop hiding from your own desires and instead listen to them like messages from your subconscious, you'd start unlocking doors to your past and corridors to your future. Your darkness is not evil. Your cravings are not wrong. They are encrypted truths. And when you decode them, you stop being a slave to them. You become something terrifyingly rare, self-aware, and most people aren't ready for that. But you didn't flinch. You listened all the way to the end, so maybe, just maybe, there are parts of you you've never met, not because they're absent, but because you've buried them so deep they only surface in disguise. Not in daylight, where logic and control rule, but in the dim glow of imagination, fantasy, and craving. And in that space, your sexual desire becomes the most honest reflection you will ever face. Desire doesn't lie. It doesn't care about your reputation, your religion, your relationships, or your moral code. It erupts from the shadow self, the part of you that was shaped not just by love and comfort, but by pain, absence, fear, repression, and hunger. You don't choose what turns you on. You discover it, like a message smuggled out of the prison of your unconscious. What arouses you isn't random. It's a blueprint, a cracked mirror reflecting pieces of your soul that were never allowed to breathe. Maybe you crave being dominated, because you've spent your life being in control, never safe enough to let go. Maybe you're drawn to the forbidden, because somewhere deep inside you associate danger with being alive. Or maybe you yearn for purity and intimacy, because the world stripped you of innocence far too soon, and sex is the only place you can reclaim softness without being punished for it. This is what people don't understand. Sexuality isn't just physical. It's deeply psychological. It's encoded with every experience you've ever had. Every betrayal, every rejection, every time you were touched too roughly or not touched at all. It carries the voice of the parent who shamed your curiosity, the religion that labeled your pleasure as sin, the first person who looked at your body and made you feel seen or invisible. Desire becomes the language of the unspoken. If you've ever been silenced, your craving might be loud. If you were ever controlled, your fantasies might be violent or rebellious. If you were ever invisible, You might fantasize about being worshipped, devoured, noticed without question, not because you're broken, but because the mind is always trying to bring balance. Your soul is always trying to speak through the only channels it has left. Sex, then, is not just an act. It's a ritual, a reenactment, a confession, a rebellion, a coping mechanism, a dream. It's where your shadow dances with your truth, even when you don't realize it. Why do you think so many people feel shame about what turns them on? Because it exposes them. It strips away the costume. It reveals that underneath the roles you play in the world, student, partner, leader, parent, there is a creature, a being, a raw, unmet part of yourself that is still trying to feel something it never got. Power, love, safety, validation, freedom, forgiveness. And yet, most people never stop to examine it. They act on their desire or they repress it. They binge it or bury it, but they rarely ask the one question that changes everything. What is my desire trying to show me about me? The moment you ask that, your craving becomes a compass, your shame becomes a clue, and your kink becomes a key to your history, your trauma, your hunger, and your healing. You might find out that what arouses you isn't about sex at all. It's about emotion, memory, energy, control, intimacy, expression, fear. You might discover that your turn-ons are not random. They are the unfinished sentences of your life story, trying to write themselves out in secret, behind closed doors. And here's the truth that most people can't handle. The version of you that exists in your desire is often the realest version of you that has ever lived. Not the one shaped by politeness, not the one sculpted by society, but the unfiltered self. The part that never learned how to speak its name except through impulse. Desire, when seen clearly, is not a flaw. It's a mirror. Not polished but cracked. Not pretty but honest. And in those cracks you don't just see lust. You see grief. You see rage. You see longing. You see lost innocence. You see the ghosts of everything you were never allowed to feel. Everything you were taught to lock away. But what if you stopped locking it away? What if you looked into that mirror not to judge but to understand? Lust is not what you think it is. It's not just want. It's not just heat. It's not the casual craving most people reduce it to. Lust is coded. It's encrypted. It's a psychological cipher, built out of your earliest memories, deepest fears, unhealed wounds, and hidden power. And the things that ignite your body are often the very things that have haunted your soul. Your pleasure didn't come from nowhere. It was constructed in silence, brick by brick, by the things you never understood, the experiences you didn't consent to, the roles you were forced to play. Lust for many is the last space where truth still leaks out unfiltered. It's a form of honesty, masquerading as arousal. Why do you think some people are drawn to pain in pleasure? Why does humiliation become a craving for those who were once emotionally starved or overlooked? Why does control feel like intimacy? Why does surrender feel like safety? These aren't random anomalies. They are reflections of psychological tension seeking release. Lust takes the twisted roads your mind couldn't walk openly and turns them into a story your body can tell. Maybe you were raised in strictness, where your choices were dictated by fear, shame, and silence. So now your fantasies push boundaries, because lust becomes your rebellion. The place where you reclaim your voice by breaking the rules that once buried it. Or maybe you were ignored, emotionally invisible, touched only when convenient, loved only conditionally. And now you seek intensity, passion, obsession, because your mind has learned to associate being wanted with being worthy. And lust becomes the currency that validates your existence, even if only for a fleeting moment. Some people chase the grotesque, the extreme, the abnormal, not because they're deviant, but because they've lived through chaos. Their nervous systems are conditioned to fire only when danger is present. So they chase edge, because normal doesn't feel alive. It feels numb. And lust in its rawest form is their resuscitation. Others romanticize innocence, the gentle, the slow, the careful, not because they are naive, but because they were violated, because their first encounters with touch were wrapped in trauma, guilt, or confusion. For them, lust becomes a restoration, not a weapon, a way to rewrite the original narrative, not through fantasy but through feeling safe in desire. The psychology of pleasure is never linear. It isn't moral. It isn't polite. It isn't meant to be. It doesn't follow the rules of what's acceptable. It follows the law of what's unresolved. Your lust carries the echoes of things you don't even consciously remember. Moments you brushed off, faces you forgot, smells, sounds, glances, rejections. All of them became encoded in the sensory archive of your arousal, and that's what makes it dangerous to ignore. Most people don't want to decode their lust. They'd rather just act it out, or suppress it, or shame themselves for it, but they never sit with it. They never interrogate it like a puzzle, because to do that would mean facing something far more uncomfortable than desire, themselves. Lust is a guide, a psychological algorithm. If you trace it back far enough, if you stop being afraid of what turns you on, you will find something real. A memory, a fear, a belief, a wound, a longing. It's never just about sex. It's about something deeper your body remembered long after your mind chose to forget. What excites you? What disgusts you but still draws you in? What do you fantasize about when you're alone, unguarded, unfiltered? That content, the raw, messy, unapproved stuff, is the source code. It's where the programming is written. And once you see it for what it is, you start to realize you've been speaking in a language you didn't even know you were fluent in. It's the language of unspeakable need, the dialect of buried emotion, the voice of the inner child, the inner rebel, the inner victim, the inner god. Lust is not a glitch in your system. It is your system. You feel it before you understand it. That pull in the gut, that surge beneath the skin, that magnetic whisper that draws your attention, hijacks your thoughts, steals into your dreams without asking. It wears many faces, some seductive, some violent, some tender, some forbidden. But no matter how it appears, your desire is always trying to tell you something, not about others, about you. Most people think of sexual craving as a signal to act, an invitation to touch, to pursue, to fantasize, to release. But they almost never stop to ask, where does it come from? What if the surface level, the attraction, the lust, the heat, is just a distraction from the real message buried beneath? Sexual desire is rarely about sex alone. It's about the ache that lives underneath the skin of your memory. It's a messenger for everything you haven't faced directly. What excites you often exposes what you're still trying to heal. What you chase in others might be what you lost in yourself. What you fantasize about might be a metaphor for your own internal war. That's the part most people avoid. Because if they dug into their desires, they'd find out that much of what they crave is a mask. And behind that mask is something they didn't want to name. Maybe you crave being needed, being pursued, being praised, not because you're vain, but because you were neglected. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped believing you were worth attention unless you were earning it with your body, your charm, your submission. So your desire builds a pattern. You place your worth in being desired. Maybe your craving leans toward pain, not because you're broken, but because your nervous system learned that pain is the only sensation strong enough to make you feel present. You don't seek punishment. You seek intensity because numbness has been your default for far too long. You don't fantasize about being hurt. You fantasize about feeling something real. Maybe you dream of power, of dominating, of controlling, of making someone yours, but beneath that it's not about cruelty. It's about reclaiming something. A part of you was once stripped of control, violated, silenced, overruled. So now desire becomes your arena of reversal. It's not just sex. It's your subconscious trying to rewrite the past by holding the pen in your own hands this time. Others might crave purity, intimacy, safety. On the surface it seems wholesome, almost innocent. But even that has its roots. You long for that kind of closeness, because the world you grew up in didn't offer it. You sexualize emotional safety not because you're naive, but because it's rare and therefore eroticized in your mind. You want connection in the place where others only seek performance. Because to you, touch isn't just physical, it's medicine. No craving is without context. No desire is meaningless. Behind every kink, every attraction, every arousal is a deeper message. A truth, an echo, a need that wasn't met when it should have been, or a boundary that was shattered before you knew how to defend it. This is why people feel confused about their own fantasies, why they feel guilt, why they judge themselves without even understanding what they're judging. Because on the surface the craving might look immoral, extreme, unexplainable, but underneath it's a symbol. It's a metaphor the body speaks when the mouth can't find the right words, and the more you repress it, the more it mutates. The more you ignore it, the more it seeks louder, darker ways to express itself. But when you look at it, not as a shameful urge, But as a coded message, you begin to see the truth. Your desire is a record of everything you've ever needed, but didn't know how to ask for. The craving is just the costume. What it hides is the part of you that's still waiting to be seen, held, understood, forgiven, unchained, remembered. You think you know yourself. You think your desires are just preferences, likes and dislikes, tastes you developed over time. But what if they didn't evolve? What if they formed in response to your wounds? What if your arousal is not the story of who you are, but a map of what you've survived? There's a reason certain things turn you on. And it's not always pleasure. It's pain repackaged. It's grief disguised as lust. It's the trauma that never got processed, now showing up as obsession, fixation, or craving. That's the part no one teaches you. What arouses you may be the aftershock of what damaged you. Maybe someone made you feel worthless early on. Maybe you were ignored, unseen, unloved unless you performed. So now you associate value with being desired. You light up when someone wants you, not because it's love, but because it scratches the itch of a childhood spent starving for approval. You confuse attention with affection. You confuse desire with safety. Because the deepest parts of you never learned the difference, or maybe it's darker than that. Maybe you were controlled, manipulated, touched before you understood what touch even meant. Your boundaries were violated, so your body built new ones, crooked ones. Now you crave what once consumed you. The power imbalance, the fear, the domination, because in your subconscious, reenacting the wound feels like control. If you can own the thing that broke you, maybe it won't hurt you anymore. But it still does, quietly, repeatedly, silently. You see, the brain doesn't forget. It stores everything, even the moments you swore you'd buried. The shame, the confusion, the way you learned to dissociate from your own body just to survive. That doesn't disappear. It just morphs. It seeps into your fantasies. It rewires your pleasure centers. Until one day, what broke you begins to feel like what you need. And no one talks about it, because it's uncomfortable. Because it challenges the neat, sanitized version of sexuality most people pretend to have. But if you were honest with yourself, brutally, unapologetically honest, you might start to see the pattern. You might recognize that your turn-ons aren't random. They are patterns carved out by pain. Why do you think people feel addicted to things that destroy them? Why do they chase intensity instead of intimacy? Why do they confuse submission with love or cruelty with passion? Because the nervous system bonds to familiarity. And if what's familiar is chaos, violation, or emotional starvation, then that's what your body starts craving, even if your mind hates it. This is the split. The mind says, I deserve better, but the body says, this is what love felt like, so I need more of it. And until you understand that split, you live in contradiction. You seek what you hate. You want what hurt you. You get turned on by what should have never been a part of you in the first place. Some people romanticize their trauma. They sexualize their abandonment. They eroticize their shame, not because they're sick, but because they never learned another language. Their first experience of attention might have been through objectification. Their first taste of connection might have come with fear. So now, even years later, their pleasure comes fused with pain, and they chase it, again and again, not because it's right, but because it's familiar. That's the cruel beauty of the human mind. It tries to create meaning from chaos. It turns wounds into rituals. It reshapes survival into seduction. And what once crushed you becomes the very thing you crave. You look in the mirror and wonder why certain things excite you, why certain fantasies return, why the same pattern repeats in different bodies, different beds, different nights. It's not just desire, it's data. Psychological residue, evidence of where you were broken and how your mind adapted. You didn't choose what arouses you. Something inside you wrote it, long before you ever knew what desire was supposed to feel like. There is a version of you that you keep hidden, not just from the world, but from yourself. A version that doesn't obey your moral compass, your social image, or your carefully crafted persona. This version doesn't care what's acceptable. It doesn't seek approval. It lives in your shadow, buried under layers of politeness, obedience, and survival instincts. It only surfaces when you're alone, unguarded, when the mask slips and the body speaks in its ancient language. Desire. Your sexual desire is not just about attraction. It's a whisper from that forbidden self. It carries signals from the parts of you you've been conditioned to suppress. Your rage, your hunger, your longing, your helplessness, your power. It contains the wounds you denied and the wants you were never allowed to express. Not safely, not fully, not honestly. So they found another way out. Through fantasy, through arousal, through the unspoken world behind your eyes. What you crave is not random. It's coded. It's a reflection of unmet needs dressed in flesh. Sometimes what you want in sex is the very thing you were denied in life. Not because it's perverse, but because your psyche is always trying to reclaim balance. If you were silenced, you might crave being loud. If you were controlled, you might desire surrender. If you were unseen, you might fantasize about being worshipped. Not for ego, but for existence. For proof that you are real, that you matter, that someone can finally see the version of you that was never acknowledged. For some, desire is about ownership, being taken, used, dominated. They don't understand why it excites them, but it does, because powerlessness was once familiar, because being controlled in fantasy feels safer than being ignored in reality. Because what they couldn't stop back then, they now eroticize in an attempt to make peace with it. Others are drawn to taboo. They find arousal in what society rejects. It's not just rebellion, it's a form of identity. The forbidden feels honest because it's untouched by societal filters. They crave what's off-limits because everything that was once off-limits to them was rooted in their truth. Emotions they weren't allowed to feel, questions they weren't allowed to ask, boundaries they were punished for setting. So now the forbidden becomes sacred, a place where they can finally exist without censorship. Your fantasies, no matter how dark or tender, aren't flaws. They're fragments of stories that were never completed. Your sexual mind builds narratives where you get to reclaim the pen. You get to rewrite what was stolen from you, repeat what was twisted, fulfill what was neglected. It's a deeply psychological process, one that doesn't follow logic, because the body remembers what the mind tries to bury, and what turns you on is often what was once unbearable to feel. This is why shame and desire so often go hand in hand. Because what arouses you points directly to the things you were told not to be. Not too emotional, not too loud, not too needy, not too soft, not too angry, not too curious. So you learn to exile those parts of yourself. But they didn't die. They waited. And now they rise, not through your words but through your wants. The forbidden self doesn't live by the rules of approval. It doesn't care about normal. It remembers everything, every slight, every silence, every swallowed scream. And desire is its voice, a raw, primitive, unapologetic voice that refuses to be silenced any longer. You might think your sexuality is just about what excites you, but in truth, it's about what shaped you. It holds the fingerprints of everyone who touched your life, lovingly or violently. It reflects what you needed and never got.